If you've listened to Gov360 for any length of time, you might have noticed something. We talk about some pretty heavy stuff on this show. We've talked about burnout. We've talked about loneliness. We've talked about political instability and dysfunctional organizations. We've talked about social media and what happens when public servants become targets. We've talked about city managers losing their jobs. We've talked about talented people wondering whether they should leave local government altogether. And I don't regret any of those conversations. I think we need to have them. In fact, one of the reasons I started Gov360 was because I thought there were conversations happening privately among people in this profession that we weren't having publicly. But there's another side of this story, because despite everything I've talked about on this show, despite everything I've experienced over more than 25 years in and around local government, and despite all of the challenges facing this profession right now, I love this profession. I believe in local government, and I am genuinely excited about its future. In fact, I think something interesting is happening right now. We're seeing a new generation of public servants coming into the profession. We're starting to figure out how to use social media rather than simply allowing social media to use us. Artificial intelligence is giving us capabilities that would have seemed almost impossible just a few years ago. We're finally talking openly about some of the things that have been hurting this profession for decades. And everywhere I look, I continue to meet incredibly talented people who still believe that public service matters. So what if the story we've been telling ourselves is wrong? What if local government isn't dying? What if it's evolving? What if this difficult period we've been going through isn't the end of something? What if it's the beginning of something better? Maybe, just maybe, local government has a new hope. Welcome to Gov360, your full circle view on local government leadership, and now the most watched local government podcast in America. Today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to be optimistic. Now, I'm joking a little bit when I say that because I actually consider myself a pretty optimistic person. But if your only exposure to me has been through some of the recent episodes on this podcast, you might not necessarily know that. We've explored some difficult topics, and I think those conversations have been important. Leadership is hard. Local government is hard. Pretending otherwise doesn't help anybody. But I also don't want Gov360 to become a place where we simply catalog everything that's wrong with the profession, because that's not how I see local government, and it's certainly not how I feel about my career. I've spent more than 25 years around local government. I've been an elected official. I'm a city manager. I've worked with councils and employees and residents and business owners and community organizations. I've seen some of the best parts of this profession, and I've experienced some of the worst parts of it. And if I had to do it all over again, I'd choose public service again. Absolutely. So today, I want to make the case for hope, not blind optimism, not some feel-good episode where we pretend everything is wonderful. That's not useful either. I want to talk about some things that I think are genuinely changing in this profession and why I believe those changes give us reason to be optimistic about what comes next. And more importantly, if you're struggling right now, I want to talk about some of the things you can actually do to make your own experience in this profession better. Before we get into that, though, I want to tell you about two things we've been building around Gov360. The first is the Gov360 community on Patreon. One of the things you've heard repeatedly on this show is that leadership doesn't have to be lonely. That's really the idea behind the Gov360 community. It's a place for people in and around local government to connect with one another outside of normal conferences, meetings, and professional environments. We have live conversations, Commute with Chris, resources, discussions, and opportunities to talk candidly about leadership and public service with people who understand this world. If that sounds valuable to you, I'd love to have you join us. You can find the Gov360 community on Patreon. And we've also launched the Gov360 Briefing, our free email newsletter. The briefing gives me another way to share ideas, leadership lessons, professional tools, observations about local government, and some of the things I've been thinking about between episodes. If you enjoy Gov360, I think you'll enjoy the Gov360 Briefing as well. There's a link in the episode description where you can subscribe for free. And of course, if you're watching this on YouTube and you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, hit that subscribe button. It costs you nothing, it helps the show tremendously, and it makes sure you don't miss future conversations. All right, let's talk about hope. There's a story that has taken hold in local government over the last several years. You've probably heard some version of it. Nobody wants to do this anymore. Nobody wants to be a city manager. Good people are leaving. Councils are getting worse. Residents are angrier. Social media has made everything toxic. Young people don't want to work. Nobody trusts government. The profession isn't what it used to be. And here's the uncomfortable thing. There is some truth in almost every one of those statements. That's what makes the narrative so powerful. I've seen good people leave this profession. I've seen talented city managers decide the personal cost was no longer worth it. 2 of them have reached out to tell me that story just in the past week. I've watched social media turn minor controversies into major crises. I've watched misinformation spread faster than facts. I've watched good public servants become targets simply because they happen to be the person whose name was attached to a difficult decision. Those things are real. But here's where I think we make a mistake. We take a collection of real problems and turn them into a conclusion. We assume that because the profession is going through a difficult period, the profession must be in decline. Those are not the same thing. Sometimes disruption is decline, but sometimes disruption is transformation. And I think there are signs all around us that local government is beginning to adapt. Maybe not quickly enough, maybe not everywhere, but it is happening. And the first place I see it is in the next generation of public servants. Now, every generation eventually complains about the generation coming behind it. That's practically a law of nature. They don't work as hard as we did. They're entitled. They expect things too quickly. They don't understand sacrifice. They don't want to pay their dues. If you're in your 40s or 50s, you've probably heard some version of that about millennials. And now millennials are saying it about Gen Z, which is pretty funny when you think about it. But I want to challenge some of the conventional wisdom about younger employees in local government, because I spend time around some really impressive young public servants. And I don't see a generation that doesn't care. I see a generation that cares differently. They ask questions that previous generations sometimes didn't ask. Why are we doing it this way? Why does this meeting need to exist? Why do I have to be sitting at a desk to accomplish this particular task? Why are we using a process designed in 1997? Why can't technology do this? Why should somebody sacrifice their marriage or their health to prove they're committed to their career? And sometimes those questions make those of us who've been around a while uncomfortable because we survived in the old system. Maybe we even succeeded in it. So there can be a tendency to say, well, that's just how this profession works. But what if it doesn't have to work that way? What if some of the things the younger employees are challenging actually deserve to be challenged? I think about the culture around city management when I was coming up. There was a certain mythology around the job. The city manager is always available. The city manager knows everything. The city manager absorbs the pressure. The city manager doesn't complain. The city manager works whatever hours are necessary. The city manager handles it. And there is something admirable about that sense of responsibility. I still believe deeply in responsibility. Leadership does require sacrifice. Public service requires sacrifice. There will always be nights and weekends. There will always be emergencies. There will always be difficult stretches where the job demands more from you. But there is a difference between sacrifice and dysfunction. And maybe the next generation is helping us see that distinction more clearly. They care about boundaries. They care about mental health. They care about authenticity. They care about having meaningful work. They care about whether the organization they work for actually reflects the values it puts on a poster in the conference room. And I think that's healthy. They're also digital natives. They're comfortable communicating in ways government traditionally hasn't been. They're less intimidated by technology. They're more willing to question legacy systems. They're comfortable collaborating across organizational boundaries, and perhaps most importantly, many of them are still choosing public service. Think about that. They have more career options than almost any generation before them. They can work remotely for companies located anywhere in the country. They can build businesses online. They can change careers more easily. They have access to information about salaries and opportunities that previous generations never had. And yet some of them are choosing city halls. They're choosing planning departments. They're choosing public works. They're choosing public safety. They're choosing public service. That should give us hope. But there's a responsibility that comes with that. We cannot spend all of our time complaining that young people don't want to enter local government while making local government a miserable place for young people to work. We can't complain that there aren't enough future city managers while refusing to mentor anybody. We can't say we want innovation and then punish people every time they question the way we've always done something. So here's something practical you can do. Find somebody younger than you in your organization who has potential. Take them to coffee, take them to lunch, and don't spend the entire conversation giving them career advice. Ask them questions. What excites you about public service? What frustrates you about this organization? What do you think we're doing that doesn't make sense? If you were sitting in my chair, what would you change? And then listen. You don't have to agree with everything they say, but listen. And when you mentor them, don't try to create miniature versions of yourself. Help them become the best version of themselves, because the future of this profession doesn't need to look exactly like its past, and that might be a very good thing. Now let's talk about something I've criticized quite a bit: social media. If there's been a reoccurring villain in conversations about modern public leadership, social media would certainly be a candidate, and for good reason. Social media changed the relationship between government and the public faster than most institutions could adapt. 20 years ago, if somebody was angry about something at City Hall, they could write a letter to the editor. They could call the city. They could show up at a council meeting. Maybe they'd tell their neighbors. Today, somebody can pull out a phone, type something that may or may not be true, hit post, and potentially reach thousands of people before the city even knows there's an issue. That's a fundamental change in the information environment. And government was terrible at responding to it. Our instinct was institutional. Prepare a statement, route it through 3 departments, have legal review it, remove anything remotely interesting, post it 3 days later. Meanwhile, somebody on Facebook posted a 45-second video from their truck and reached 80,000 people. We were bringing a fax machine to a gunfight, and then we wondered why we were losing control of the narrative. But I think something is changing. I'm seeing more local governments and more individual public servants understand that communication today requires something different. It requires authenticity. It requires speed. It requires personality. It requires explaining complicated things in language normal human beings actually use. And most importantly, it requires telling your story before somebody else tells it for you. There are public sector leaders doing this extremely well now. They're showing projects, they're explaining decisions, they're celebrating employees, they're answering questions, they're using humor. They're letting residents see the human beings behind the institution. And that's important because government has spent decades communicating like a building. Buildings don't have personalities, people do. Trust is built between people. That's why I think one of the most interesting possibilities for the next few years is that the technology that contributed to the collapse of trust in government could ultimately become one of the tools we use to rebuild it. Think about that. For years, we've treated social media primarily as a threat. What if we started treating it as infrastructure? An infrastructure for relationships, transparency, storytelling, and trust. That doesn't mean responding to every troll. Please don't do that. It doesn't mean turning your city manager into an influencer. And it certainly doesn't mean chasing whatever ridiculous trend happens to be popular this week. It does mean understanding that communication is part of leadership. If you're a city manager, department head, or public information officer listening to this, here's my challenge. Tell one authentic story about your organization every week. Not a press release, a story. Show the public works employee who got up at 2 o'clock in the morning because a water main broke. Show the planner who's been working for 2 years to bring a project across the finish line. Explain why that road project is taking so long. Show people what happens behind the scenes before a firefighter ever responds to a call. Introduce the employee who's been quietly serving that community for 30 years. Explain the decision. Explain the trade-off. Explain why. Don't try to go viral. Try to become trusted. Those are very different goals. And if enough local governments learn how to do that well, I think the relationship between government and residents can improve. Not because everyone will suddenly agree with us. They won't. Democracy doesn't require agreement. But healthy democracy requires some basic level of trust, and communication can help rebuild it. If you'd like help crafting the right social media strategy for your organization and training your staff to implement that strategy, take a look at my good friend Sam Tolles and his company, Civis Social. Sam has the most effective approach to social media for local government that I've encountered. For a deeper dive on this topic, check out episodes 3 and 10 of Gov360. I'll put links to those episodes, as well as to Civis Social and Sam's book, The Social Media Playbook for City and County Managers, below in the show notes. The next reason I'm optimistic is artificial intelligence. And I know that sentence will make some people nervous. AI is moving extraordinarily fast. There are legitimate concerns about it: accuracy, privacy, security, job displacement, bias, and the possibility that people will use it irresponsibly. All of those conversations need to happen. But I think there's another side of AI that isn't getting nearly enough attention in local government. AI might give us something that government leaders desperately need: time. Think about how much of your day is consumed by information processing: reading, summarizing, drafting, rewriting, researching, preparing presentations, reviewing documents, sorting through emails, creating agendas, comparing versions of documents, turning a 40-page report into 5 talking points for a meeting. How much of that work actually requires your unique human abilities? Some of it does. A lot of it doesn't. Now imagine increasingly capable tools handling portions of that administrative burden. The obvious benefit is efficiency. Government can accomplish more with fewer resources. That's important. But I'm more interested in what happens to the time we save, because the best parts of leadership are incredibly human. Mentoring somebody, sitting down with a resident who is frustrated and actually listening to them, building a relationship with a council member, thinking deeply about the future of the organization instead of reacting to whatever email arrived 5 minutes ago, going into the field and seeing what your employees actually do, calling somebody to tell them they did a great job. Those things are leadership. And yet those are often the first things that disappear when our calendars become overwhelmed by administrative work. So here's a provocative possibility. What if artificial intelligence doesn't make government less human? What if it gives leaders the capacity to become more human? I think that's possible, but only if we're intentional about it, because there's another possible future. AI saves you an hour, so you fill the hour with another meeting. Then it saves you another hour, so you answer 30 more emails. Then it makes you 20% more productive, so you increase your workload by 20%. Congratulations. You've used revolutionary technology to become even busier. That's not the goal. So here's something I'd encourage you to try. Identify one repetitive task you perform every week, something that consumes meaningful time but doesn't require your unique judgment every step of the way. Experiment with using AI to reduce the amount of time that task takes. Obviously, follow your organization's policies. Protect confidential information. Use good judgment. But experiment. And here's the important part. Take some of the time you save and deliberately reinvest it in another human being. Walk down the hall. Call somebody. Mentor somebody. Visit a project. Talk to an employee. Technology should create capacity for leadership, not simply capacity for more work. If we get that right, AI could fundamentally improve the way local government operates, and I think we're still in the very early innings. There's another change happening in this profession that doesn't look optimistic at first. We're talking about our problems a lot. We're talking about burnout. We're talking about mental health. We're talking about loneliness. We're talking about political instability. We're talking about city managers being fired. We're talking about social media abuse. We're talking about whether expectations we place on public leaders are sustainable. We're talking about people leaving the profession. And if you look at all of those conversations together, you could reach the conclusion that something has gone terribly wrong. And maybe it has. But there's another possibility. Maybe something is finally going right. Because for a long time, we didn't talk about this stuff, especially in leadership. There was a culture of toughness. Handle it. Don't let them see it bothers you. Don't admit that you're struggling. Don't tell anyone you're lonely. Don't acknowledge that the council member's attack got to you. Don't talk about what the job is doing to your family. Don't say you're burned out. You're the leader. Lead. Now, I understand where that comes from. Leaders do need resilience. There are moments when everybody else is looking at you and you have to be steady. You cannot outsource that responsibility. But resilience is not pretending you're invincible. And I think our profession is beginning to understand that. Some of the conversations that sound negative are actually evidence of maturity, because you cannot fix a problem you refuse to name. If talented city managers are leaving because the personal cost has become too high, we need to understand why. If younger employees look at executive leadership and say, "I don't want that life," we should probably listen. If public servants are struggling with isolation, we need stronger professional communities. If social media is affecting people's mental health, pretending everybody should simply toughen up isn't a strategy. We have to talk about it. That's part of why I started Gov360, and it's part of why I created the Gov360 community. I've come to believe very strongly that leadership doesn't have to be lonely. There are things you can only really discuss with people who understand what the job feels like. Your spouse may love you deeply, but they may not understand why a 3-minute exchange during a council meeting is still running through your head at midnight. Your friends outside government may not understand why you're worried about something that hasn't happened yet. Your employees can't always be your confidants. Your counsel certainly can't always be your confidant. So you need people, peers, mentors, friends in the profession, people you can call and say, "I need to talk through something," and they understand immediately. If you're struggling in this profession right now, please don't isolate yourself. Find your people. Maybe that's through your professional association. Maybe it's a group of city managers you become close to. Maybe it's former colleagues. Maybe it's the Gov360 community. I don't particularly care where you find it, just find it. And then be that person for somebody else. Because sometimes the most important thing you can say to another leader is not, "Here's what you should do." Sometimes it's, "Yeah, I've been there." There is enormous power in knowing you're not the only one. And that brings me to what is probably the biggest reason I'm optimistic about local government: the people. Over the last year, Gov360 has given me an opportunity to have conversations I probably never would have had otherwise. I've sat across from people with different careers, different experiences, and different perspectives. I've talked with city managers. I've talked with leaders across different points in their careers. I've heard stories about success. I've heard stories about failure. I've heard people talk about moments when they questioned whether they could keep doing this. And I've watched this community around Gov360 grow through the podcast, through LinkedIn, through the newsletter, through the Gov360 community, and through messages people send me. And one thing has become incredibly clear to me. There are a lot of really good people doing this work. Really good people, smart people, creative people, funny people, compassionate people. People who could probably make more money somewhere else. People who could have chosen careers with less scrutiny and fewer evening meetings. People who get attacked publicly on Tuesday night and show up Wednesday morning ready to serve. People who spend years working on projects that residents will never realize they had anything to do with. People who take phone calls during family dinners. People who show up during fires and floods and emergencies. People who spend their careers trying to leave communities a little better than they found them. Those people don't usually make headlines. That's part of the problem. Dysfunction makes headlines. Competence usually doesn't. Nobody posts a viral video that says, "My city provided safe drinking water again today." Nobody gets 100,000 views for saying, "Trash pickup occurred exactly as scheduled." There's no breaking news banner announcing that the finance department completed another clean audit. Success in local government is often invisible. When government works well, people simply live their lives. The traffic signal works, the park is open, the police officer responds, the fire engine arrives, the water comes out of the faucet, the development gets built, the business opens, the pothole gets filled, the budget balances, the community moves forward. And behind every one of those things are people. That's what gives me hope. If you spend all day reading comments on social media, it is very easy to become pessimistic about local government. Spend some time with the people actually doing the work. It's much harder. Now, maybe you're listening to all this and thinking, "Chris, that's great, but you don't know what's happening in my city. You don't know my city council. You don't know what happened at the meeting last night. You don't know what somebody posted about me. You don't know how burned out I am. You don't know how close I am to walking away." And you're right. I don't. There are situations that really are unhealthy. There are organizations that really are dysfunctional. There are elected officials who behave terribly. There are moments when leaving a particular job is absolutely the right decision. Hope doesn't require denying reality. And let me tell you from personal experience, if you are in such a situation right now, leave. Plan your exit, because I promise you, there are still healthy places out there. There are functional city councils. There are positive and welcoming communities. There are organizations where the staff will embrace your leadership. I don't want you to make a permanent judgment about an entire profession based on a difficult season. And I especially don't want you to surrender all of your agency. Because when we're struggling, it's easy to start thinking that everything has to change before we can feel better. The council needs to change. The community needs to change. Social media needs to change. My employees need to change. The profession needs to change. Some of those things may need to change, but you can't control most of them. So what can you control? First, build your inner circle. I talked about this earlier, but it matters enough to say again. Find people who understand this work, not networking contacts, not people you exchange business cards with at conferences. People you can actually call. Invest in those relationships before you need them. And when someone calls you, answer. Second, control your inputs. This one is difficult. If you're in public leadership, you need to understand what's happening in your community, but you do not need to consume every opinion about you. Those are different things. If 50 people are furious on Facebook, that doesn't necessarily mean your city of 40,000 people are furious. If somebody posts something cruel about you, reading it 17 times will not make you a better city manager. There's a difference between staying informed and marinating in negativity. Learn that difference. Third, invest in somebody else. One of the best ways to reconnect with your own sense of purpose is to help somebody else discover theirs. Mentor somebody, encourage somebody, give somebody an opportunity they aren't sure they're ready for. Tell a talented employee, I think you could do my job someday. You may be surprised by what that does for them, and you may be surprised by what it does for you. Fourth, eliminate work that doesn't require you. This is where technology comes back in. Your time is finite. Your energy is finite. Your attention is finite. Stop spending your highest value resource on low value work simply because that's how you've always done it. Delegate, automate, use AI, simplify. Cancel a meeting that doesn't need to exist. Stop producing a report nobody reads. Leadership isn't about being busy. Leadership is about creating value. And fifth, remember the mission. This may be the most important one. When the politics get loud enough, it's easy to forget why you started doing this. So go look at something your organization accomplished. Go to the park your team built. Drive the road you widened. Walk through the fire station you helped fund. Visit the business that opened because your economic development team spent 2 years working behind the scenes. Talk to the employee you hired 5 years ago who's now thriving. Look at the community, not the comments, the community. There are real people living real lives that are better because somebody chose public service, including you. Remember that. Lastly, don't wait for somebody else to fix the profession. There's a temptation in conversations like this to talk about the profession as though it's some external thing. The profession needs to change. Local government needs to modernize. City management needs to evolve. Okay, who's going to do that? There isn't a headquarters somewhere with a board that meets to determine the future of the profession. There's no committee that's going to fix all of this for us. We are the profession. You are the profession. Every city manager who decides to mentor somebody is changing the profession. Every department head who creates a healthier culture is changing the profession. Every public information officer who figures out how to communicate authentically with residents is changing the profession. Every analyst who questions an outdated process, every young employee who decides public service is worth their talent, every experienced leader who admits, we got this wrong, every organization that experiments with AI responsibly is changing the profession. Every leader who decides that treating employees well is not incompatible with expecting excellence is changing the profession. Every public servant who tells the story of what government is actually doing is changing the profession. That's how institutions evolve. not all at once, person by person, organization by organization, decision by decision. So don't wait for the future of local government to arrive. Help build it. And maybe that's the biggest reason I have hope. We have more control over what happens next than we sometimes realize. When I started thinking about this episode, the phrase, A New Hope, immediately made me think of Star Wars. Obviously, Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. And yes, I realize I'm probably exposing myself as a nerd here, not to mention aging myself. But I kept coming back to the phrase because I think there's something important about hope that we sometimes misunderstand. Hope isn't the belief that everything is fine. That's denial. Hope isn't the belief that everything will magically work itself out. That's wishful thinking. Hope is looking directly at the problem in front of you and believing that something better is still possible. That's different. And that's where I am with local government in 2026. Are there problems? Absolutely. Political polarization isn't disappearing. Social media isn't going away. Public trust isn't going to rebuild itself overnight. Artificial intelligence is going to create as many difficult questions as easy answers. Recruitment and retention will continue to challenge organizations. There will still be bad councils. There will still be bad managers. There will still be nights when somebody says something at a public meeting that makes you wonder why you ever chose this career. There will still be days when you're tired. There will still be people who leave. There will still be moments when leadership is lonely. But that's not the whole story, because there's another story unfolding at the same time. A new generation is coming into public service, and they're bringing different expectations, different skills, and different ideas. We're finally learning that communication isn't something government does after the work is finished. Communication is part of the work. We're learning how to use the tools that once seemed like threats to build relationships directly with the people we serve. AI is giving us the opportunity to rethink processes that haven't meaningfully changed in decades. And if we use it correctly, it may actually give leaders more time to do the most human parts of leadership. We're finally talking openly about burnout, loneliness, mental health, and the personal cost of public leadership. And instead of seeing those conversations as evidence that the profession is falling apart, maybe we should recognize them as evidence that we're finally willing to make it better. And through it all, good people keep showing up. That's the part I don't want us to lose sight of. Good people, like you, keep showing up. Tomorrow morning, somebody is going to unlock City Hall. Somebody's going to climb into a public works truck. Somebody's going to review a development application. Somebody's going to respond to a 911 call. Somebody's going to balance a budget, sit across from an angry resident and try to solve a problem, stay late preparing for a council meeting, take a job in local government for the very first time, decide they want to become a city manager someday. And somebody who's having a terrible week is going to get up tomorrow morning and try again. That's public service. And I still believe in it, maybe more than ever. So if you're struggling right now, I hope this episode gives you a little perspective. Your difficult season doesn't have to become your permanent view of the profession. Find your people, control your inputs, mentor somebody, use technology to give yourself some time back. Get out of the office and remind yourself what the work actually accomplishes, and then help build the version of local government that you wish existed. Because somebody has to. Why not you? If this episode resonated with you, I'd ask you to do a couple of things. First, subscribe to Gov360 on YouTube if you haven't already. We're building something here, and every subscription helps us reach more people and bring more voices into these conversations. And if there's somebody in your organization or your professional network who needs to hear this particular episode, please send it to them. Second, if you want to go deeper than the podcast, I'd love to have you join us in the Gov360 community on Patreon. The entire idea behind the community is something you've heard me say repeatedly. Leadership doesn't have to be lonely. We're building a place where people in and around local government can connect, have candid conversations, share ideas, and learn from one another. If you've been looking for more connection with people who understand this profession, come join us. Search Gov360 on the Patreon app or at patreon.com. And finally, subscribe to the Gov360 briefing. It's completely free, and it's where I'm sharing leadership ideas, practical tools, and observations about local government. You'll find the subscription link in the episode description below. Thank you, as always, for watching, listening, sharing the show, and being part of what we're building with Gov360. And especially, thank you for those of you who are still showing up every day and doing this work. The profession isn't perfect. It never will be. But its future isn't predetermined either. We get a say in what happens next. And when I look at the people coming into this profession, the tools becoming available to us, the conversations we're finally willing to have, and the public servants I encounter every single day, I have hope, and a lot of it. The future of local government isn't something that's going to happen to us. It's something we're going to build together, and maybe, just maybe, local government has found a new hope. I'm Chris Mann. This is Gov360. Until next time, govern boldly, my friends.